morning. This is Julia Widup with Talk Story TV, and I have with me Marilyn Redmond, and she's going to take us through her journey through domestic violence. And this is part one of a writer's journey through domestic violence. So go ahead, Marilyn.
Well, good morning, Julia, and thank you for having me on your program.
Thank you for being there.
Well, it sounds like since this is part one, we'll start at the beginning. And the beginning was I didn't realize how much impact that would have on my life later on. But most people see domestic violence as a problem right immediately happening then, very acute situation that has become disastrous. And my experience in searching out answers, I've discovered mine actually started way back when I was first in the womb. I am a past life regression therapist and internationally board certified. So I have done a lot of work on my subconscious and inner life, and I better understand the dynamics of this because of that extra knowledge that I've been able to come in touch with and have access to. So I took on my mother's fear of her paranoid schizophrenia in the womb and realized that about the age of 3 months I was in total stress through molestation and other things that had occurred. Plus my parents were fighting every night. So I was raised in domestic violence and came from parents who were already wounded. So this was a history that started out with not a very good beginning in the first place, and it just progressed worse and worse as I continued through my life pattern. I also know today that as I saw my father beat my mother when I was 3 years old, that time it was not just with the door closed and listening to it, but I actually witnessed it. And in witnessing it, it felt like I was being beaten up also. And I wanted to be off the face of the earth because if he couldn't find me, if he couldn't find me, then he wouldn't hurt me either. And I also had a little shell of protection I put around me at that point, thinking that if I'm in this little turtle shell, I'll be emotionally safe. I didn't understand those terms in those days, but I just wanted to be safe. And my ego, of course, tries to protect you, and that's part of our problem of disconnecting us from what really is healthy and whole and wholesome and loving. And so I was in this little emotional turtle shell since the age of 3. And I tightened up my muscles really, really tight because in those days, as a violin string is tightened for pitching the tone, I thought, well, the tighter I am, the smaller I'd be. And I think a 3-year-old would think that. And so my muscles, I tightened them to try to be smaller so he couldn't find me. And in this situation, I started then to continue my life in this turtle shell of stress, tightness, and fear and chaos and shock and all the things that go with it. So I believe I've had a lifetime of disastrous things, and I was just basically attracting what I was. And so as I grew older and tried to date and find other people in my life to love me, and my mom remarried, and I thought, oh, finally I'll have a dad, and he couldn't be loving because he was not only an alcoholic, sex addict, but rageaholic like what I was used to. And so I just really became the Cinderella in that family because his mother, my step-grandmother, said, well, you're not of our blood, so I'm not going to treat you like a granddaughter. So not only was I abandoned by my real father, but my stepfather abandoned me basically also.
And another woman too.
Well, with my mother, it was my stepfather and my mother. He married my mother, and I was there, and they had a child. I do have an older half-sister, but my younger half-sister came along, and so I was taking care of the family, taking care of her, and I was the Cinderella. I was definitely the one that did the chores and took out literally the ashes. So what I know today is I was always looking for love in all the wrong places. And when I was dating in high school, and nice fellows would ask me out, but they wouldn't ask me again, and I know today that I was sicker than they were, and they just took off fast. But when I got to college, I met this fellow in the music department. We were both going to be music teachers, and he would come and practice in the practice rooms when I was there, and we'd start visiting and talking, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. I can communicate with this guy. He understands what I'm saying, and we seem to get along really well. And for me, that was a really wonderful situation that I kind of found someone to be a friend and a fellow, especially a fellow, because I was wanting a boyfriend. And what I discovered, he was very charming, and he said all the right things, and he asked for my opinion. Nobody had ever done that. And wasn't supposed to, in my age, children are to be seen and not heard. And so nobody really ever asked me my opinion before. That was very flattering. And what I know today is that a charming person doesn't know how to be real. And when you're playing a game, which domestic violence is a passive-aggressive game, I've discovered. And I was very passive, and he was, of course, the aggressive one. And so growing up in that environment, I found somebody that was just exactly like me, I discovered later. And all my loneliness and insecurity and abandonment and financial issues I thought would be resolved in my marriage. And we were basically engaged, and I wanted to look good in society, but during the engagement, I found myself expecting a baby, and in those 50s days, unwed mothers were the scum of the earth, and I couldn't handle being that judged. I already was terribly judged and shamed at that point. So we decided to get married, and it was for all the wrong reasons, of course. And thinking that it would work out, about 6 months into the marriage, he strangled and raped me. And at that point, I was pretty much his slave and did whatever he wanted because I didn't want to get hurt. And I've discovered I've lived my life off of some pretty deep fears. And one of them was not being physically hurt because my mother was physically hurt. I didn't want to go through that. And as you and I have discussed before, what you're afraid of is what you attract. So guess what? So it took a long time for me to understand all this and come to an understanding that I was in this marriage, but he controlled the money. I had a good paying teaching job, but I brought home the money and it was his, and he controlled everything in my life. And I was his Barbie doll, and what I wore was what he picked out and selected. We both had come from mentally ill parents. We'd both come from families of alcoholism. We both came from domestic violence, and there was sex addiction in his background, and I turned out to be a good enabler of sex addicts. And so, and the rage in our fathers was basically this very similar degree of rage. So we were two peas in a pod, and he became my ultimate lesson in life, actually, because of this. I had to go through these experiences to come out on the other side, I know today. He went to the doctor getting Valium, trying to solve his problems, and of course, being an alcoholic, he was drinking. And I decided that my life was so unbearable, he was trying to kill me, that I went to the psychiatrist and I ended up with Valium. And my Valium little stash turned out to be what I was going to take and try suicide. I tried suicide several times to get out of my mess. He had even jumped over a king-size bed and to strangle me one day. So when he tried to attack me other times, there really wasn't any safe place. And when we were on a ride, we'd been married about 25 years, and he was trying to quit drinking. And we went up to Canada to celebrate. It really went nice for about 3 weeks. And we thought, well, we've really worked it out. And thinking we had. Of course, it was a very superficial working it out, I know today. And so he decided at happy hour he would have a drink. And we were going to celebrate the good times, right? We finally were having some good times. And when I didn't dress the way he wanted me to that night, his sex addiction came out strong. And his rage came in immediately after, just very shortly after having his first drink. He went into this rage in the whole evening, and we ended up leaving this lovely, lovely resort in Canada, heading home in the middle of the night because he was just fuming. And it was like a suicide ride, and this time he was going to show me. And I really thought that night I was going to die. He tried to kill me before, and yeah, I see. I prayed to God out of desperation. All my prayers before that had been in church hymnals, and I never actually had just said a prayer. I didn't know how. So I just instinctively said, God, please help me. I really don't want to die. And I believe he had a blackout. I passed out. About 10 minutes or so, 20 minutes later, he was off the road where it was safe, passed out over the wheel till morning. And he came to as the sun was coming up. And I was sitting there in total pincushion time, full of anxiety, wondering what's coming next, because I really thought we were going to have a head-on collision on the highway. That was my huge fear, is we were going to crash right into that car. I mean, we were very close a couple of times, let's put it that way. Yeah. Time was the charm. And so he woke up and he says, oh, what beautiful day, you know, isn't this a nice day? And I thought, where's he been? It's been a nightmare. And so my son, he wasn't going to let me out of the car at first, but he wanted to, at the border I was planning to get out, and he wouldn't let me. But I did get out for when he wanted coffee, left a note for the police to take me out of the car. And at the coffee restaurant, I left this message, and they found us on the road and rescued me. My son came to the border and picked me up, brought me home, and that was the first time I filed for divorce. It took me 3 times to get out of that marriage, because I discovered you're bonded to the negative energy. You know, if you're so lonely that even though you're treated so poorly, it's better than nobody at all. In my family, that was familiar behavior. So to leave something you're used to and something that is actually helped some of your insecurities, like my financial insecurities and you know, the loneliness of where I was coming from, and afraid of being hurt, but staying there anyway. People say, well, why doesn't she just go? And what I know is the bonding in not only domestic violence, but any abusive situation keeps you there. It's like you have to hang on to your abuser. It sounds strange, but that's how your mind works.
Yeah, they call it Stockholm Syndrome, when people are kidnapped and bond with their kidnappers.
Well, I was his hostage.
Yeah.
Alcoholics take hostages. I know today how he was more scared than I was. I'm sorry about that. He was more scared than I was. And I gradually realized that I had a little bit more power than I realized and could walk away. It was not easy. Like I say, it took 3 times.
Yeah, I understand. And now you counsel other people who are trying to get out of those situations, right?
Yes, I do, because I've been through the experience. I'm finding out experience is what you share with your clients, and there is a very healing energy in that. So many people have a lot of book learning, is what I call it. Out of the textbooks, you go to school, you learn how to do this and that, but it's coming from the head. And what really is the healing aspect of this is coming from your heart. And I lived in my head. That was my protection. That's where your ego provides the fear that we run from or deal with or pretend we can't handle, because of the fear fools us. And so when you've walked past the fear into the healthy part of your life, of handling things from a better place, then you can help somebody else with your hope and your successes to be able to have the strength for them to do it too. So that's discovered.
We're almost out of time. Could you tell, in case someone's watching this that needs help and needs your help, could you tell them how to get a hold of you?
Yes, I have a website, angelicasgifts.com. Or you can also Google my name and you'll come up with angelicasgifts.com. Okay. I also have a couple videos on YouTube about domestic violence and empowerment, so you can check out YouTube and get more information and contact me too.
And Marilyn has written an article for us, and you can also find a link to her there at tvbackstory.com. Thank you for being with us this morning, and we'll see you next week.
Well, I'm looking forward to helping people understand even more about this, so thank you for having me back again.